Health Tech Week, a series of events dedicated to answering this exact question: how we as European Union can better reap the fruits of technological innovation to ameliorate the lives of persons. Moreover, telemedicine has grown into something essential for those living in remote or insular areas, and is crucial for us to continue developing and delivering its opportunities to all in need. Biomedical technology has also played a vital role in the pandemic response. From masks to ventilators, these technologies have not only enabled us to respond to the current pandemic, but they have also laid the groundwork for future advances in healthcare and pandemic preparedness. And we must ensure that everyone remains resilient, prepared, at the forefront for all technological and medicinal advances. As we look to the future, it is clear that innovative technologies will continue to play an increasingly important role in healthcare delivery and pandemic management. However, we must also ensure that these technologies are accessible to all and that they are used in an ethical and responsible manner. This will require strong regulatory frameworks and investment in research and development. In Europe, we have made important strides in these areas. The European Commission has launched the EU for Health program, which aims to strengthen healthcare systems and promote innovation in health. We have also begun the process of establishing the European Health Data Space, which will enable the secure sharing of health data across the EU. However, there is still much work to be done. We must continue to invest in research and development, and we must ensure that all manner of innovative technologies, including telemedicine and biomedical technology, are integrated into our healthcare system in a sustainable and equitable manner. This will require collaboration between policymakers, healthcare providers, and technology companies, as well as engagement with patients and academia. In conclusion, I believe that currently the EU has a unique opportunity to transform healthcare delivery and pandemic management. However, realizing this potential will require a concerted effort from all stakeholders. And this is was my concept when with my team we composed this three-day conference. And I think that we are in the process of building our European Health Union, so it's important to create strong foundation on this ongoing process, and we need to combine all these manners in order to have good results. Therefore, we would like to share with you our ideas, our fears, the innovations, and we created this conference. To this end, I would like to thank all my staff for preparing this great conference. Ms. Penju, Mr. Atonakakis, Mr. Koulianos, and Mr. Tsakidis. And I'm very glad to have you here. And I think that all together we are prepared for the challenges of the future, and we are harness the power of technology to improve the health and well-being of our citizens. Thank you very much, and I'm here to listen and to exchange all the views. Thank you very much again.
Let me start thanking Dr. and MP Kympouropoulos, because this is not the first event we organize in the European Parliament, but I must say this is the first time I see that much passion, interest, and willingness to listen to stakeholders. And this is a unique quality that I have seen on this occasion for Dr. Kympouropoulos and his wonderful team. So let me start thanking all the team for that. And now, as president of EAMBES, I'm more than happy to welcome all of you here. In the interest of time, I will not talk much now, and I will leave the floor to Professor Palikaragis for chairing the first session. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please allow me, first of all, before starting, to express my gratitude to Dr. Kympouropoulos for giving me this opportunity to moderate the first session. And I have to declare that in Greece, not only the more than 500,000 voters that voted him to become a member of the European Parliament, but all Greek citizens are proud of him. Thank you so much again, Dr. Kympouropoulos. And of course, I have to thank my friend and colleague, Professor Pekia for also co-organizing this event and probably mention my name, and that's how I'm here today. So I will moderate the first session, and I think that compared to the program, we have to change a little bit the agenda and the sequence of speakers because of some problems, technical problems. The first session that I will moderate is on innovation and technology as gateways for a safer and healthier future, and focus on the impact of COVID-19 and the lessons learned. So instead of Dr. Klaus Krudvik, I will ask my colleague Eleni Kaldoudi to start with the first speech on the best practices for the pandemic, telemedicine, an innovative tool for pandemic response and the opportunities it brings for insular and remote areas. Eleni Kaldoudi is president-elect of EAMBES. I think from tomorrow will be the president of EAMBES, or from today afternoon. She is coming from the University of Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, and she is professor of medical physics and telemedicine at the School of Medicine at the University of Thrace. Eleni has acted as a member of the Greek National Representative Team for EU Framework Program 7 on capacities, and she is a reviewer and very active in scientific journals. And I'm glad to welcome here as a colleague and friend as well. Eleni, the floor is yours.
Professor Palikarakis, thank you for this warm introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, my dear colleagues, I would like to congratulate all the organizers for putting together a mostly rich program for today's event. I'm especially grateful to you, Dr. and MEP Stelios Kympouropoulos, for inviting me here to offer some insights on the state of play of telemedicine. So I will first highlight some facts and then attempt to draw some conclusions and suggestions. Since the first telephone transmission of an electrocardiogram by the Dutch physician Eindhoven in 1906 and the science fiction article by Gernsback back in 1925, which predicted telemedicine in the form of telediagnosis and then teleexamination via the radio, well, telemedicine has come a long way. Today, we define telemedicine as any clinical service offered over a distance using information and communication technologies. However, telemedicine is only a part of a multitude of services offered over a distance, covering the entire spectrum of preventive, promotive, and curative healthcare. Even more, currently, patients and healthy citizens alike can enjoy a variety of technologies and applications that support health, well-being, care, and clinical services at the point of need, and not only over a distance. Well, this continuum we call e-health or digital health. Well, research interest in telemedicine starts around 1975, with increasing rates during the 90s. You can see, I hope you can see in the graph, the evolution of scientific articles on telemedicine as a percentage of the total biomedical literature included in PubMed, which is the largest biomedical citation database. Well, as it happens, publications in the field of telemedicine are only a subset of e-health publications, which are produced at a significantly higher rate. Well, to better understand the evolution of the field, just before the pandemic, we used algorithms to perform topics analysis on this collection of more than 30,000 publications in e-health. Amongst the many topics we identified, discussion about telemedicine although considerable, shows a decline. However, there is other evidence to suggest that this might be due to the fact that telemedicine is now shifting from research to implementation. Indeed, a recent publication showed data from more than 2,000 studies evaluating telemedicine implementations in 53 countries in the whole European region. Overall, that accounted for around 60,000 enrolled patients from 23 countries in this region. And you can see the red part in the upper part of the image. Well, pooled results show a clear benefit of telemedicine interventions in a range of significant diseases for valid, reliable, and accurate services, including screening, diagnosis, treatment, and long-term follow-up. I would ask please to advance the slide. Okay, here, thank you. As with many other fields, the recent pandemic has escalated the use of telematics. Indeed, scientific publications in the field of e-health and telemedicine alike showed a steep increase during the last 2 years. Adding this recent experience to previous findings, we can attest that telemedicine has the power to break down geographical and social barriers and expand access to health services. In particular, to support insular and rural areas, as well as secluded and immobile patients wherever they may reside. To extend expert care to everyone and everywhere. And I would like to add, eventually, change the healthcare delivery paradigm from one health service fits all to personalized health services customized to the citizens' needs and daily schedule. Well, concluding, I would argue that evidence from the telemedicine boom during the pandemic suggests that in order to be able to have a full and successful deployment of telemedicine, we have first to amend conventional telemedicine technology with emerging artificial intelligence models. Then we have to develop clinical protocols to guide the use of telemedicine and its integration into the clinical workflow. And of course, update accordingly regulatory, legal, and insurance frameworks. But last and above all, I think that we need to devise and deploy change management strategies in order to engage clinicians and patients alike in this new form of healthcare delivery. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kardoudi. I think that we are going to have the discussion and the question and answer session at the end of the 2 sessions. So we're going to move to the next presentation in this same area that will be given by Dr. Baharaki, a child psychiatrist, member of Medical Association of Cyclades. She is today at the hospital of Syros, which is the capital of Cyclades, for those of you who don't know. Her degree in medicine was obtained at the Aristotle University as well. And I think that is a university that is quite well represented on this table because myself, I made my studies as well at Aristotle University. The floor is yours, Dr.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Thank you for inviting me in this exciting and novel panel. And thank you again, Dr. and MEP Stelios. As I have been introduced, I work 22 years now in the hospital of Syros. And the most known islands in the Cyclades, of course, are Santorini and Mykonos, just to put you in the map. It is indeed the Cyclades are the southeast region of the Aegean Sea, and is indeed one of the most beautiful Greek regions. The problem with similar complexes is universal and has to do with accessibility. 4 years before the pandemic, on February of 2016, the national network of telemedicine started to operate, and yours truly was the first doctor in a national network to contact a telemedical appointment via this system. This system connected the General Hospital of Syros with the terminals at the health units of all the islands of the Cyclades, even the smallest and most remote ones, and actually all the islands of the Aegean Sea, expanding to the island of Lesbos the last 6 months. Unfortunately, it was scarcely used by other specialists, even though it is built in with real-time remote connection of ultrasounds, EEG, stethoscopes, and other instruments that are user-friendly, even for the not so digitally updated colleague as I. Thus, telemedicine was contacted firstly and foremost at the one area in Greece that had the majority of insular posts, the Cyclades. At the first presentation of the system in May of 2017, at the annual National Psychiatric Conference, there were 3 speakers, me, the IT expert responsible, and the doctor from a remote island, the facilitator, as is the term we used, and only one person at the audience who was dragged unwillingly. When the pandemic and the subsequent lockdowns came, things changed dramatically, as the Hospital of Syros had already established a remote way of medical appointments. Additionally, when the lockdowns were firmer, excluding even the use of the telestations in the health units, the system had already the infrastructure for the organization and the technical support of connection between my office, for example, and the home computers of the users. And this included the previously walk-in cases of the inhabitants of Syros and the nearby closest islands. From day one of the first lockdown, the child psychiatry department of the Hospital of Syros never ceased to render its services. Now, I'll just say some numbers. Through this system, we had around 2,000 appointments with around 1,000 families or children. Pre-COVID, we were engaged more with evaluations, case managements, and consultation to other doctors through telemedicine. My clinical impression was that during the pandemic, and especially during the 2 long lockdowns, the demands had more to do with therapy or consultation sessions. Indeed, we found out that therapy/consultation or some brief therapy sessions were addressed to the almost 1% of the cases before COVID, but during the pandemic, that percentage rose to almost 10% of the cases. That shows us that the telemedicine system at the time of the pandemic was ready and capable to address the changing needs of the public. I don't mean to say, of course, that we need a pandemic to appreciate telemedicine, but if in general it was thought to belong to a specific geographical area, during the lockdowns, we all insular and remote, and even scientific communities that abhorred that medium were forced to consider it, or at least to form an opinion about its existence. I think it was for the best that in Greece, the specialties that have more experience with telemedicine are psychiatry and child psychiatry. Evidently, the system cannot run without its hardware and its software, but there also exists a softer software, a soft skills guideline for its smooth functioning. These are factors based on international bibliography, but also on our living experience. We have to take into consideration how to make a relationship through internet connection with people of all ages, how to pose, how to dress, what kind of background we use, how to give control to the other side, the client side, how to conclude, how to say goodbye, and many, many more that are applicable to all specialities. How to use the new language in presence as opposed to telepresence, which refers to the specific view angle, which is very important for the command of the session, and many more. At the end, how to communicate with the societal system of a faraway island and connect with people and professionals that maybe you will never meet in person. Every point in a station from Syros is a window to another place, as each island has its own microclimate, environmental and cultural differences. I presume the same applies for telemedicine to other places of Europe, as telemedicine per se is used to connect places that are far between and unapproachable. Thus, usually we expect at least some kind of degree of difference and variation. We must add here that the practice of telemedicine connecting remote and insular areas does not only address the needs of the population, but helps the doctors that work in these areas, offering the expertise of different specialists that connect with the system, which otherwise would have been unavailable to them. Concluding and considering the above, general and specific guidelines are needed to be made and implemented. Young people and our young students and our young interns and our young doctors have already surpassed us at the field of telecommunication in general. We need to take advantage of their knowledge and experience and attitude and incorporate them in a structured and significant way to the university and to the internship of its specialization. Thank you very much for your attention and patience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Baharaki, for this very interesting introduction on the real practice of medicine during COVID. I think that you demonstrated very well the importance of telemedicine in that case. Thank you very much. And we move to the third presentation on the same subject of telemedicine that will be from Professor Giorgos Tsakos, who is Professor of Dental Public Health at the University College of London, Chair of the Platform for Better Oral Health in Europe. He has been President of the European Association of Dental Public Health and the International Association of Dental Research Group, and he is a collaborator of WHO through the Collaborating Center of WHO that it is in UCL Dental Public Health Group. Professor Tsakos, please, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for that really kind introduction, Professor Polikarakis. But my profound thanks go first to MEP and colleague Kympouropoulos for giving the floor to that important activity and giving voice to oral health in that important activity. But if I may say so as well, can I thank very much his team for the professionalism they showed and very well planning of the event. I'm really grateful for that because I think it makes a nice transition from one speaker to the other. What I will try to talk about in the next 7 minutes is to give you a perspective from an oral health and a public health background. I'm here not only as a professor of epidemiology at UCL, but also as chair of the Platform for Better Oral Health in Europe, which is an umbrella organization, as academics used to call it an umbrella review of reviews, where it includes all the European oral health, but also primary care societies, trying to advocate for better oral health through a public health approach at the European level. So I will try to bring those two perspectives, and I'll start by saying, if I could have the next slide, please, that oral conditions are public health problems, and that's not something that was very well known until we had that late interest with the Global Burden of Diseases study, which showed that oral conditions are the most prevalent non-communicable diseases worldwide, but also in Europe as well. And they are very much treatable and preventable, and I will come to that in a minute. And they have a major impact on individuals and societies, but also quite a big economic impact on societies. But normally, usually, they tend to go stealth. No one really notices they exist. And if we could have the next slide, that's expenditure to treat diseases at the European Union level. We were surprised by it when we found that dental diseases are on par with cancer in terms of expenditure, less than diabetes and CVD, but very much more costly than policymakers usually tend to think. That's why we have a Lancet Commission on Oral Health very recently, because a Lancet does a commission on something if it is a big public health problem, but also neglected, goes under the radar. And at the moment, we have a Lancet Commission on Oral Health headed by my colleague Richard Bott at UCL. And WHO has very recently went out of its own silo, if you like, and has come with a global strategy for oral health that was welcome with all European Union member states. They all voted for it. They all committed to do something about it. And the strategy goes through an action plan stage now. For the next 10 years, every member state will have to say what they do about improving oral health through the universal health coverage principle as a main vehicle. And that comes very much in line with the introduction of MEP Kympouropoulos was talking about accessible, affordable, equitable. It's the three words I kept. They are very central to the universal health coverage principle. In that, there will be what they call the best buys, which is evidence-based or evidence-informed, cost-effective solutions. And in that framework, e-health, if I can use the wider definition, not just teledentistry, but the wider remit, has a very major role to play. Indeed, WHO has the oral health program. Terminology, you're worse than dentists, I have to say. You have health, e-health, teledentistry, telemedicine. It's endless, and people choose what they pick. I'm glad Professor Kaldoudi put it in a straight line and clarified what the definitions are and where we are with this. And if you look at the four pillars of that, the one is about literacy, the second is about training, then early detection, and then surveillance. Pillars 2 and 3 receive an awful lot of attention, if you like. Pillar 1 tends to, but in a very narrow focus, I would say. It's just the literacy bit, whereas the health promotion bit that stays there and could be expanded further. And what also is there, and I would like to highlight it, if you can see the slide, it talks about policymakers. I think there's something involving the civil society, the media, the policymakers into a health advocacy. And we in oral health try to do that over and above our forces, but I think it's a general health issue. We tend to have that debate closed in our silos, not engaging with the wider stakeholders sometimes. And I think this group is probably one that does engage with the wider stakeholders. If I go to my other clinical specialties, that's a bit more of a silo approach. And I think that's very, very important to consider. So, the fourth one is talking about surveillance and how we can use solutions to help epidemiology. And that's not part of today's discussion, so I will bypass it, but it's nevertheless very important and very close to my heart. So thinking about how that came to being, and Dr. Bacharaki was saying before that we didn't need a pandemic to sort of appreciate teledentistry. No, we didn't, but sometimes things happen and you know, with a bad thing, you get a positive knock-on effect. And it's interesting that when the disruptions in services and in oral health services were like every other service, even more so, services were completely disrupted in the beginning of the pandemic. When that happened, there was suddenly a very high interest in telemedicine solutions and how they can be used in oral health to screen patients, monitor progress, triage or give advice. Well, that was always there. There was no need for a pandemic, but no one was really using it. No one was applying into context. It could get even worse because particularly for oral cancer, the pandemic has a significant impact on prognosis and quality of life. Oral cancer is anyway diagnosed very late. That happened even later. And suddenly people realized that there was a tool there they could do something about. Better late than never, I would say. So I think there's major opportunities. And if I could have the next slide, please, going towards the end. So the major opportunities, and I'm repeating, I didn't know the introduction that would happen in the beginning about access and equity, but I'm repeating what previous speakers said, so I will go fast with that. The major issues around improving access to oral health care, doing it in an equitable way, in a way that deals with affordability and other financial type of barriers. I would see it as an important tool for integrated health care, including a wider package in the Universal Health Coverage Compendium. We shouldn't just stop to deal with the emergency of care provision. It is a tool to be used in general. But as with every opportunity, there's also things to look forward to and be mindful, and the devil lies in the details. So for me, there's three messages from me here. The first one is to make sure we adapt to context. And the key thing is to co-design, co-produce, work with the wider stakeholders rather than assume we know and implement. It won't apply. It will be like the guidelines. I work, I'm Greek, as you can tell from my accent, but I work and live in the UK, and we have the NICE there, which is the National Institute of Health and Clinical Excellence, that produces guidelines. And the guidelines are really nice, but then try to implement them is a different type of problem. Adapting to context interventions rather than assuming one solution fits all is essential. My second message would be, it's about time we use e-health solutions about using the common risk factor approach to promote health, contribute to health promotion, have a broader public health aspect rather than look at literacy. Literacy is key on that. The inequalities aspect is key on that. And I would finish by saying, and that is the danger. They have potential to reduce inequalities, new technologies, but we need to monitor that. We need to be sure that it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen that they wear it well, use the technologies more, and exacerbate inequalities rather than reduce them. Why am I saying this? Because I think in many areas we go into evaluation, not in all areas of e-health, and I think there's a huge potential there, not to just be mindful that they shouldn't exacerbate inequalities, but they can be used actively to promote a better health and reducing inequalities. And I leave you, I think, just about on time with that quote from Michael Marmot, who's a world-leading authority and really privileged to be in the same department with him, when he wrote, "What good does it to treat people's illnesses and then send them back to the conditions that made them sick in the first place?" What I mean with that is that digital health or e-health is a really useful tool in improving health and reducing inequalities. And public health aspect of it should not be neglected. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Tsakos, not only for the very interesting presentation that you gave, but also for the way that you gave this presentation. I think that you speak with passion and you believe on what you are saying. Thank you so much. Now we have to continue with the next presentation, and we're going the opposite in the agenda. I will pass the floor to Dr. Lutz Peske. He studied chemistry and has a PhD in chemistry and also a PhD in media studies. The first one from the University of Heidelberg and the second from the University of Bonn. And is a very interesting combination of studies. And now he's associate professor in the Department of Media and Communication Studies at Bilkent University in Ankara. He will speak about connecting society and the role of widespread cooperation in pandemic management. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for your very kind introduction. And it is for me very exciting to be here to present our Horizon project Pandevita. And it's exciting for me because we have here the very most of the team leaders of this project, which I can in this context directly introduce as well. At the beginning, when we entered this room, I talked with Leandro Pecchia, and he directly said at the beginning, when our project started, he became president of EAMBES, and he said, it was a really big challenge to be the president of EAMBES in the pandemic time, and I definitely can understand that. When I created this project as a proposal at that moment, my understanding was, or I was a little bit naive, my understanding was, when we are granted at that moment, the pandemic time will be over. And I must say, from the academic point of view, it was a luck that it was not over, but of course we all know especially the public suffered a lot. And this is why our motivation for our research was, or in fact our premise was, if we want to improve the pandemic management, we have to understand the user and media perspective of knowledge transfer and information processes better. And the basic model what we used for our research was the quintuple helix innovation model by Karayanis and Campbell. And in fact, they found out, or in fact, the model says that if we are talking about sustainable developments, and we have to include pandemic or health issues as sustainable development processes as well. At that moment, 5 systems have to collaborate with each other. This is the academic or educational system, the economy, the natural environment of society, the media and culture-based public, and politics. And they have to collaborate, especially in the knowledge transfer, and everybody has to contribute with their know-how and has to participate from that. So, in fact, what we need, what is new in these kind of understanding is that the media-based and culture-based public is included in these kind of knowledge innovation processes. And we have to understand how we can include them much stronger in knowledge production. So it means citizen science involvement processes avoids, or this is our basic understanding, opinion-based discourses and leads to more evidence-based actions. And therefore, we wanted to create a COVID-19 tracking application to understand how we can include, with help of these CTAs, the public more inside of the knowledge exchange. And we all know the ethical use of CTAs depends heavily on the protection of voluntariness. And this was, in fact, our central aspect. So therefore, in our Pandavita project, we developed a Pandavita platform, which was divided in 2 parts, in the Pandavita dashboard and the Pandavita app. But before we did this, we made a lot of research about what is at the moment state of the art and how do we have to understand these kind of topics. So the first, what we did, we wanted to understand the legal and ethical boundaries in Europe a little bit better. And this research was executed under the lead of Selda Güneş-Peşke. She is law professor at Ankara Yıldırım University, and with her team, we got this kind of better understanding. So, in fact, what we understood from this analysis is when public health is the main issue to be protected, it can take precedence over the fundamental rights, and exceptional provisions can be applied in the regard under emergency situations. So, it is always, in fact, a kind of conflict, which is, in fact, the priority and what is, in fact, needed in the special times. And the second part of this research, which Selda Güneş-Peşke executed with the team, was in fact about the understanding of vulnerabilities in pandemic times. So therefore, especially our focus was the gender aspect in COVID-19 crisis, and she executed in Ankara a focus group event with women which were working in decision-making processes from UN Women, from the International Labour Organization, and different other organizations. And as the result, she prepared with the team a policy brief with certain recommendations. I only want to mention 2. One was the equal pay work of equal values should be encouraged, and violence and harassments need to be prevented, addressed as issues and eliminated. Now, the second work package, or in fact work package 3, which was executed and led by the team of EAMBES, especially from the team of Eleni Kaldudi, was in fact we wanted to understand a certain perspective of voluntariness, and we executed 3 case studies. One case study was executed by my team. It was about information and knowledge exchange through general practices in quintuple helix. This is quite interesting because the general practitioners had a very special role inside of that. They were on the one hand side the services for the public, but at the same time also, like in fact media, in fact has the double function in the system public. They mediated the knowledge transfer in the system of science, politics, and economy to the public. And this was really a big challenge, what we have definitely to consider for the next pandemic, which most probably will come in the next decades. So the second case study was about microeconomic indicators. This was executed by economists in Ankara and EAMBES University. And the third one was executed by Elini's team about topical, temporal, geospatial, and emotional analysis of Twitter posts related to the COVID-19 pandemics. Very exciting. I found especially very exciting that the team found out that retweets of and comments on tweets of pharmaceutical companies showed that only a small amount of feedbacks revealed sentiments of fears. The very most of them were neutral or coined by joy. This was for me quite surprising and quite interesting. And based on these informations, what we created, what we found out, we designed a dashboard. This was executed by, now I don't see him, the team of Giuseppe Fico from Political Technical University of Madrid. And we took all this information, create first of all user stories, and based on these user stories, the team of Giuseppe transferred it into platform features with help of the so-called Volere methodologies. And finally, we created, or we had platform features. Especially interesting, the focus is on news and news which are endorsed by scientists, so everybody can contribute with their own news, including the public, but of course with the endorsement of scientists, official documents from public authorities, and so on. So we included, in fact, the whole quintuple helix inside of this platform, because our understanding is we need, in fact, all information, all knowledge from all 5 systems. The other aspect, or in fact, the other technical device what we created was a CTA, the Pandavita app, and there we included especially aspects of gamifications, because our understanding is if we want to engage the public at that moment, we do not have to only to strike their head, we have to strike their heart as well. And that's why we found out the most of the CTAs, which were in fact in different countries, had a lack of gamification aspect, and therefore we created this because we want to find out which kind of impact these gamification effects have. And this is what we will investigate in the next month within different pilot studies, which are executed by our team from another team from Spain, Predict By, and this will be executed in April. So other the dashboards and will be analyzed with help of pilot studies as well, starting with April, so we can present the results of that in June when our project ends. Yeah, at the end, I would like to make a little bit advertisement to 2 events which we will execute inside of our project. One is the final Pandavita conference in Ankara. It will discuss the sustainable collaboration processes in pandemic times. In June 8th to 5th at Bilkent University, you are all cordially invited to come. We have already 2 very honorable keynote speakers. One is David Campbell, one of the fathers of the quintuple helix model from the Technical University of Vienna, and the other one is Figen Çişmeci, professor and member of the National COVID Science Board in Turkey. So if you want to come, you are cordially invited. The call for papers is still going on, therefore, please feel free to submit your paper for contributions. And the other one is a very hot news, that's why I couldn't communicate it with my Pandavita team yet. We will execute a final symposium in Brussels in the building of the German Association of Cities and Municipalities, very close to here, on the 27th of June. And there we want to present the final results, especially for the European Parliament Committee COVID-19 pandemics, lessons learned and recommendations of the futures. If you want to have further information about that, please subscribe our newsletter, follow our channels, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Penske, for this very interesting presentation of this very important project. We will try to join you in the two events probably. Now we have to follow the inverse route, and we continue with a presentation from Professor Giuseppe Limoncelli on the implications of COVID on different sectors and the challenges for patients and practitioners. I think that he will join us through internet.
Yes. Good morning. Good morning to everybody. Sorry for the delay. I had some problem with connection. Can you hear me?
Welcome. Yes, we hear you,
Okay.
Professor Limoncelli. Thank you very much for being with us even from distance. And this is a proof how tele means today work.
Yes,
Professor
absolutely.
Limoncelli is Associate Professor of Cardiology in the Department of Translational Science, Università della Campania, a full professor and director of Inherited and Rare Cardiovascular Disease Unit at Monaldi Hospital. He has been working with many national and international guidelines committee, and he's an editor-in-chief. He's the editor-in-chief in cardiogenetics, among many other titles that he has. So the floor is yours, Professor Limoncelli.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this invitation. It's really a pleasure and honor to be here. And I have to say that I'm learning a lot. So I will try to bring you in the, let's say, in the patient world, particularly fragile patient, starting from the background, what was the impact, of course, of COVID on the health system. And we all remember that the first wave had an immediate result on mortality and morbidity of COVID related to COVID-19. The second wave had an impact on research restriction on urgent non-COVID condition. The third wave had an important impact on interrupting the care on chronic condition, including fragile patient as a rare disease patient. The fourth wave is still ongoing with all the psychological, economic problems and also the burnout of the healthcare physician. Next, please. And bringing in you into rare disease world. The word rare disease probably give us a different perception. Of course, taking isolated, they are rare condition, 1 on 2,000, but we are talking about 300 million people in Europe and US, in the world, sorry, 30 million in Europe and US. And they are mainly genetic and pediatric disease, but we have a very broad array of different conditions, and only 6% of these patients have a definite drug, a definite cure. Next, please. So the challenges on this fragile patient were really lots. Challenges related to delayed diagnosis. We know that a delay in diagnosis in patient with rare disease is median 4 years up to 10 years, and this is not acceptable, of course. And COVID worsening things. scarcity of proper treatment and care in this situation. We also had many problems to conduct our research trials, of course. The patient for their condition had specific problems related to different inherited or rare condition. There was some concern regarding vaccination of this patient, and of course we had to adopt some specific tools, including technology, including telemedicine, that was so important to reach our patient. Next, please. And of course, we also try to create guidelines. I don't want to say guidelines, more expert opinion. And this is what we did, for example, for inherited and rare disease with the European Reference Network related to a cardiac condition. I want to remember that we have 24 European Reference Network for different rare diseases, and this is an important, let's say, property of Europe. It's not present in other countries. It's not present in US. And these guidelines try to help us to understand what was what was really urgent for our patient, like devices or surgery, and what was possible to do by technology, by telemedicine, like consulting, family screening, follow-up of our patients. Next, please. We also adopted some, in Italy, some guidelines coming from the ISS, the Istituto Superiore di Sanità, and this was really helpful to consult our patients in our local, but also sometimes national patients, and also to reach some remote countries or even the islands. I want to remember that around Naples we have nice islands, but not just around Naples. And this was really, really important. Next, please. And as a coordinator of the network in Campania region, I tried with all the network to try to make a picture of the situation, and we used the regional registry on rare disease to make this picture. Next, please. And I would like to show you, this is the photography of 2018, 19 and 20 for the months January, February, March and April. And as you can see easily, in March and April 2020, we had a really important fall of diagnosis for rare disease in Campania region, but I'm sure this data can be similar in other regions. And next, please. We also conducted a survey to understand what was the problem, which problems our network of physicians faced during the first wave, and of course the access to diagnosis, the access to follow-up of the patients, the lack of personal protective equipment, the lack of guidelines, and also the home therapy that was not available at the beginning was something really problematic. And so of course, the action was access to home therapy and non-delivery for our patient, and teleconsulting that helped a lot to reach rare disease patients. Again, next, please. We also conducted a study to understand a link between some specific therapeutic profiles using big data and also the infection of COVID-19, and we found a link between the use of cardiovascular drugs and metabolic drugs with the infection on COVID-19, and this probably has been related in some way to the comorbidities of our patients. Next, so this is the last slide. It's just, let's say, a summary, but also some kind of take-home message. This is an editorial we did with Domenica Taruscio, Istituto Superiore di Sanità, Annalisa Scopinaro from the Italian Federation of Patients, just trying to discuss what we did during COVID, what we learned from COVID, and what we need to develop. Well, what we need to develop, probably we need to learn how to use new technologies to facilitate, suspect, improve diagnostic delay, and improve outcome of our rare disease patients. And we are working, I have the opportunity, and I'm really lucky to work with Professor Leandro Pecchia, also to improve AI methods in rare disease patients. We need to improve education in rare disease, but also education on the use of technology in rare disease, and this can be planned with the ERN and the European Commission. And we need also to listen more to the patients, understand what are the unmet needs, and in some way learn, teach to the patient how to use also technologies, because we need in some way a feedback from the patients if we want to use technology. And also probably we need to understand how to use technology to prevent future events, particularly for fragile patients. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Limoncelli, for this very interesting presentation. And I hope that you will be able at the end of this, of the second session, to be present and probably answer some questions. As far as I understand, Dr. Klaus Krutke is not able to join us now. And I would like again to thank the organizers for giving us this opportunity to be here, and thank all the speakers for the very nice presentation that they did, and ask them now to move down to the floor, and the next speakers will come, and the new moderator, Professor Ratko Magyarovic, will be in my place. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody, and I'm also very glad to see that so many of our colleagues are able to be here. First, of course, let me thank our host here, Dr. Kympouropoulos, for organizing this session. And as much I can see, until now, all the technical details have been from the human point of view, organized excellently. It's only the technology that made this little gap. So since we lost some time due to these problems, I would like to immediately start with presenting the next presenter and let him actually take the floor. So our first presenter is the president of the European Alliance for Medical and Biological Engineering and Sciences, Professor Leandro Pecchia. He's coming currently from Rome, where he is a full professor and at the University campus Biomedical. So he's also involved as innovation manager of the World Health Organization for research and development, the blueprint and COVID-19 pre-program. So Leandro is really very much engaged with the biomedical engineering societies, and currently I'm very happy to say that he is also the Secretary General of the International Federation for Medical and Biological Engineering. So that is the most difficult position actually, because all the organizational issues go through him, and I'm very happy to have him as Secretary General. Now I leave the floor to Leandro. Thank you very much for organizing this event as well.
Thank you, Ratko. I'm just a guest. Okay, so in the interest of time, you heard all those little names, and then you may ask yourself, when do I work? Well, the point is that those are all very interconnected dots of one wider ecosystem. So as European society, we are part of the global society, and we are not just scientific societies. We are NGOs in official relation with United Nations, particularly WHO. So this is part of our job to bring support to public health. Next slide, please. Well, I wish I could read, but I wish you can read. So if you can read the first sentence, which, if I remember well, says that doctors were unable to cope since they were, well, trying to, well, I cannot really read the sentence, I hope you can, but if you can, I challenge you to guess when this sentence was written. Can any of you guess, unless you know the sentence? How many of you think this was written during COVID, for instance? Can you raise your hand? How many think that this was written in the last 10, 20 years or 50 years? 100 years? Well, if we click next, this was Thucydides, an historian from ancient Greek, which wrote this sentence 400 years before Christ because of the plague in Athens. And if we take this seriously, this is a proxy for how little human being can learn from our own mistakes, from our own experience. And that's scaring. First thing is we need to be aware that we need to be reactive and proactive, avoiding this is happening again. What do we mean by preparedness, readiness? Well, I adopted the definition of the World Health Organization, which just says a country has to be ready to react, okay? And that's where exactly we need to react. You see the square in red, that's before an event happens in order to prevent or eventually control, so avoiding that the curve becomes too wide. If you go to the next slide, can I ask you whether we were ready to do that when COVID came? Well, there is nothing to laugh because this was a great disaster, but the images are more clear than any word. We were unprepared. And what is the situation now? Well, now we have novel standards. Now we have defined a new concept, community mask. It was not there before COVID. It's the mask you can wear, which are not medical devices, are not PPE, but you can wear them daily in a context of universal coverage. And we have now best practice that we should learn from and just build a library so that we know where to start, because the next challenge will be different. But if we know where to start, we gain some time. And that's for medical device. Again, this is just general press from March 2020. There was a huge call to react. We were in shortage of medical ventilators, and from the States to the UK, there was a great effort in asking other companies to manufacture medical device, car manufacturers, consumer electronics, and if you read the last two titles, it was a dramatic failure. None of those ventilators entered in service. And you can say, look, It was difficult. What would you would have done? And if you go on the next slide, I don't know what I would have done, but I know how great they did in Italy. So the Italian government went to the Italian manufacturer of medical devices, of medical ventilators, there are 7 in the world, and they asked them, what do you need? We don't go to someone else ask to manufacture medical device. We come to you. What do you need to scale up your production? And they told, look, there is a microchip we don't get from China. There is a mechanical pump we don't get from China. How can we do? Well, easy. We can go to Ferrari, Fiat, and ask them to do that for you. And we give you 20 more engineers from the army. They are super trained. They can work lots of time per day. And there you are. They scaled up the production from 10 pieces per week to 100 pieces per week. Do you remember how the situation was in Italy in March 23? We all have impressed in our memory the dramatic images. We never entered the shortage of medical devices. So this was possible. We need to build on that in order to avoid this happening again. And we can do more. We have to foster innovation. In this image, you see on the top how mechanical ventilators evolved in 100 years. Completely new. And you see below, what about masks? 700 years, they look the same. Material is different, fine, great progresses, but not enough. And that's because there is not a big push. There is not one big player plaguing the Commission to invest in this area. Probably there is a lack of interest, as rare diseases. We have to subsidiate research and innovation because otherwise we are not getting top what we can get out of it. Next slide, please. Well, don't take me wrong. I think what we did during COVID was a massive, impressive achievement. I will not read all of that, but those are the milestones in year 1, from the definition of the new disease, calling for an emergency of public concern from the WHO to the definition of pandemic. In only 7 months, we defined the criteria to assess vaccines, and then we got the first vaccine in the public domain. There are diseases killing much more people now in Africa, and we still don't have a vaccine. So this is a gigantic achievement. Don't take me wrong. The same for PPE and medical devices. We got the first document on how to use PPE in a context of shortage. Great achievement from the IPC emergency team in the WHO, Madison. And the same for essential list of medical devices. This was massive achievement. Yet, if we had this library before, we would have not missed those 7 months. If you think, I didn't want to put this there, but if you think about the number of people getting COVID and dying in those months, with this 6-7 months gap, we could have saved thousands of lives. Okay, so this cannot happen again. And if you go on the next slide, it's my contribution on where we can start. In the WHO, together with stakeholders, we created a list of priorities for research. We know the gaps because we have been there. Next slide. We even know how to do innovation. So if you read this last publication from Adriana Velasquez's team, it not only tells you what technology we need in the context of scarce resources, and we were. Europe, for the very first time, was in a scenario of limited resources after the Second World War. COVID created in Europe scarcity of resources. For us, it was a cultural shock. If it happened, it may happen again. So if you read this book, apart from the technologies which is in there, is the methodology. What do you need as an innovator to be sure you get an impact? We did it, it's there. Next slide. And this is just my conclusion. I wish I can read. So in order for this not to happen again, we need to work together. We need to start from lesson learned. We need to avoid info pandemic. If innovators want to give contribution, if governments want to give contribution, let us coordinate. Let's go where there is knowledge and ask, hey guys, what do you need? This proved to be far more effective than just try anything. And reduce info pandemic. There are 3 things that on the long term, we need to learn how to do better. To be more inclusive, to be more sustainable, and to be, and I don't read the third and I don't remember. What do you mean by sustainable? Economically, but also environmental sustainable. So we need to be sure that our innovation is sustainable, affordable, accessible, but it's not worsening our planet condition. So it has to be green. And there is, for instance, now a great call on greening hospital. That's great. But we need those criteria to be in any call, for coming call. That's important. Inclusive. What do we mean by inclusion? Well, I don't think abstract concept. We still don't have enough variety in our community. Women in STEM, frail early researcher. We don't have means to subsidiate them when they need more. till PhD, we have gender parity. When they start postdoc, and postdoc are all mostly financed by European Commission, we lose this gender parity. What it would cost us to get a founder to get career break when you need it more, when you are frail? And this can probably solve one of the thousands issues that we have in Europe in terms of gender, but not only gender, all sort of variety. And cooperation. We are now working, for instance, on the European health data space. This is a great achievement. This will be a massive enabler together with the GDPR. Once we overcome the transient and the implementation, fine, but we cannot leave Africa behind. This cannot become another mean for digital divide. We have to do that, once again, we unite the nation with our neighbor country to be sure that we don't leave anyone behind. And with that, I would stop. Sorry if I got too long. Back to you.
Thank you very much for the interesting presentation and also for showing the leadership. So the next speaker is Dr. Alexander Olbrechts. He's coming from MedTech Europe as a director of digital health. And before joining MedTech, he was also in this area of the business. And today he will be talking about the impact of COVID-19 on the MedTech sector. So the impact in research, innovation, and implementation. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation and the extremely lovely introduction. So, as mentioned, I'm the Director of Digital Health at MedTech Europe. Next slide, please. And MedTech Europe is the European association representing the medical technology industry, mainly medical devices and vitro diagnostics, and where I'm the most fond of digital healthcare. Next slide, please. Of course, this might sound a little bit abstract, so let me give you some examples of what we actually produce or manufacture or develop. With regard to medical devices, you can see a hearing aid on the slide if it's visible. You can see a special bed for people with certain pathologies, and those are the medical devices. If you walk into a hospital, just by entering the door, you will encounter multiple. Another, previous slide, please. Other thing that you can see here on the slides are in vitro diagnostics. A little bit more abstract, but if you go for a sample of your body and it goes through a laboratory, it will pass through one of those IVDs, as we call them. Lastly, for digital healthcare, those are the applications that you can see. An example here that it's much more difficult to find a good picture for this, but one of those is, for example, the monitoring of blood glucose levels in diabetic patients. The second part of digital healthcare is, if you look at all the dots there, to connect them. And that is even more difficult to find a picture for, but it's equally as important. During the pandemic, all of these solutions contributed to making the life easier and helping us battling the pandemic. The pandemic had a significant effect as well on digital healthcare in Europe in general. So we saw an evolution, and it has been mentioned already a couple of times, towards an online consultation and remote monitoring. I will give a little bit of examples on how we did it and how we developed it. We saw the introduction of contact tracing apps, as already mentioned here, but we also realized that there were certain shortcomings. And there was a status quo. At one point, we realized that was 2020. And at the same time, and this is a more optimistic note, of course, is that there is a new openness towards digital health by the EU citizens. And it may come as no surprise that that makes me rather happy on a Tuesday morning. Next slide, please. An example for the online consultations, we saw already quite a bit of scientific background. But let me give you a more pragmatic example. So we saw an increase of 2,000-fold of hours of general practitioners in Germany using online consultations, video consultations. It went from 583 to 1.2 million hours. I mean, this is a lot, and it's even more to make it really tangible on how much this actually is. At the same time, not only the consultations where you talk about, okay, let's see if you have COVID, Let's see if you have another condition. Let's see chronic care, how that is being developed. But a lot of other people that needed to go to the hospital for chronic healthcare and therapy, well, this was a time where distance was of the essential. And what can allow distance and quality of care? Monitoring, remote monitoring tools. One example here is the musculoskeletal disease patient have received exercises pre or post-operative in order to prepare them or help them to go through this process. Other examples were patients that needed a follow-up, but it was possible to find that chronic care via remotely. And thus, respecting that distance and having vulnerable people not going to a hospital and exposing them to potential COVID disease. Next slide, please. Another point was the introduction of the contact tracing apps. We've seen there was a lot of difference between the different countries within Europe. But largely speaking, we could say that the uptake and the download rate of those applications was quite large. I have the example here of Finland, where the population downloaded the application with more than 50%. But more importantly, and I find even a stronger signal, is the fact that in October 2020, there was a European Federation Gateway Service, where these local initiatives could be coupled. This is again really important because this throws back to my first slide here in how this actually interconnects. Next slide, please. Of course, this is the shortcomings. We have seen it in some countries. We still had to have the statistics on paper and fax systems, which as a millennial I find baffling, but it was the reality. And it showed us that we needed a real-time evidence. Luckily, a lot of countries saw the opportunity, and that's twofold. Belgium, France, they adapted very quickly teleconsultations and found temporarily reimbursement schemes for it. At the same time, other countries, for example, Germany, Belgium again, and France found means in order to adapt these new technologies. Talk about DIGA and Health Belgium to reimburse mobile health applications and to try to embed them within the system. Next slide, please. The recommendations from our experience that we want to make is that we need to keep the momentum here. It's a real risk that we lose this momentum when we go back to the way it was. And this would be detrimental for the evolution and the digitalization of healthcare in general. The European health data space already had been mentioned. I think we as an industry as well, we see this as a huge opportunity. And it will unlock a lot of new, better technologies, more proximity to the patient, and better healthcare in general. These incentives that then need to be embedded. The access needs to be ensured, and they need to be embedded in reimbursement systems of digital health to make them permanent, sustainable within this. Lastly, new models for the developing of AI systems and to make them, again, integrate within the system in the sustainability in order to help patients, healthcare providers, the system, and make everything more affordable. Next slide, please. And this is my conclusion here, and it has been already mentioned, is regardless of the shortcomings, we saw a great momentum that we want to keep. And it's important to keep that. And we believe that Europe should take a very strong leadership role in here in order to make this possible. And the previous speaker concluded with the same message. I think we should work together. And we as well, we really want to be a constructive partner to contribute, work together, share our expertise in order to move forward, make this pivotal step, and bring healthcare in a new era where digitalization is no longer a third pillar in my organization, but it's integrated within the whole healthcare system. I thank you very much for your time and your attention.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Now we have to move to Mr. Mario Gabriele Cossello, who is the Principal Administrator, Legal and Policy Officer at European Commission. He will be speaking about the impact on security of supply, the need for European strategic autonomy in medical devices. Mr. Gabriele, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Very happy to be here with you. So I would like to thank the honorable member of the parliament and the organizers for inviting me to talk a bit about the EU regulatory framework for medical devices and in vitro diagnostic medical devices, which is the underlying references for all the ongoing and future developments with respect to public health, preparedness, pandemics, and so on. In this slide, we can mention indeed that we have now 2 regulations on medical devices and in vitro diagnostic medical devices, which have been developed in 2017 in order to address a number of problems related to the previous legislative framework, but also looking forward to improve health and safety of patients, users in general, citizens in general, and also to support innovation and further advances in science and technologies. The next slide, we can see an overview of the evolution from the previous directives. We have now 2 regulations which became applicable in 21 for medical devices and 22 for in vitro diagnostic medical devices, but with an important set of transitional provisions. We will see later on a bit more on them. Next slide. The timelines, indeed, this journey started in 2017, even before, with the preparation. And we have a perspective from now on, 23, 24, and 28 for the full implementation and going on, overcoming the still transitional provisions in place. The next slide, to underline the key changes and improvement provided by the new regulations, among others, the reinforcement of some requirements, for example, on conformity assessment bodies, on market surveillance, on registration of devices, communication with all the involved parties, and also some, for example, inclusion of certain aesthetic devices in the scope of the regulation. The idea, indeed, as I said before, was to support health and safety, support innovation, and also to ensure the adequate availability of devices for all users, patients throughout Europe. These elements went in danger, especially during the pandemic, about this very strong impact on supply chain, on availability of medical devices, also in relationship, in dynamic relationship with personal protective equipment. But for that, indeed, the Commission and Member States and all actors took and are still taking specific measures to improve the situation. In the next slide, we have some information on how the medical devices regulation work. You can see more in depth, of course, in the presentation of the different steps, but the idea is that the legislation as such is a common issue, is a common work for all the parties involved. Not only the European Commission, not only manufacturers, but also Commission, also conformity assessment bodies, Member States authorities, users, patients, and so on. This is very important to underline in order to share the same objective, the same approach to get the common goal. So again, going on in the idea we are transmitting today of working together towards the same direction. The next slide, also some basic information on the sectoral governance. Again, you can see the services of the European Commission, but then you can see also, of course, the Medical Devices Coordination Group joining, gathering member states, stakeholders at European level, and all the subgroups dealing with specific issues. The next slide, to mention indeed what is going on now. The specific problems we are facing in the implementation of these regulations that have been developed in a quite ambitious mode, I would say, in order to provide a sensitive, important an important improvement in health and safety, but due to also to external issues, we had to provide some specific measures. In particular, you can see in the next slide some short-term action and longer-term actions, including, as in the next slide, the regulation, an amending regulation published in the official journal right yesterday in order to provide a more flexible approach to the implementation of the regulations. I will pass through the next slide very quickly because, again, you can see them in the presentation as such. We would like just to mention in the slide on national provisions to underline again the contribution of national authorities and member states to implement the regulations, and also a mention to international activities because the medical devices issue is really a worldwide issue to work together with a lot of countries all over the world. The rest of the presentation contains a lot of information, references, links, so we will be very happy in the Commission to listen to your comments, contributions, and address your questions the best we can. Thank you very much again, and keep in contact.
Thank you very much, and due to the time constraints, I will just shortly introduce Dr. Adriana Velasquez, who is a senior advisor and focal point on medical devices at the World Health Organization. I may say, knowing her for a long time, that she really is the soul of medical devices. So, Adriana, I hope you are with us and that we can hear you. The floor is now yours.
Thank you very much, Leandro. Thank you very much, Radko and colleagues, and thank you for inviting me to be presenting today. I just want to kindly request if I can share my presentation, because I cannot be on. Okay, thank you very much. So I know we have a limited time, so I'll just go quickly. Is that okay? Can you see my slides? Just to confirm.
Yes, Adriana.
Thank you very much. So first of all, in request to access of medical devices, including in vitro diagnostics for the pandemic management, the most important issues are availability, affordability, appropriateness, and safe of quality assured medical devices. It doesn't matter if they are traditional medical devices or innovative medical devices. I don't know if you're all aware, but at this time, since last year, there is an intergovernmental negotiating body on pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. And I just copied some of the paragraphs that are being discussed, but so that you know, this is a work that WHO with member states is developing. And I just copied 2 paragraphs for you. That is, for example, this one on recognizing concerns about the negative effects on prices and on the production of timely and equitable access to and distribution of vaccines, treatments, diagnostics, and health technologies. And there is another one that says measures to strengthen research and development processes for pandemic response products, such as, but not limited to, diagnostics, medicines, and vaccines in developing countries. So I think these 2 paragraphs really call exactly what is being discussed today. So just to go quickly through my slides, it is everyone, everywhere needs medical devices for protection, diagnostic, and treatment. In WHO, we have been developing the priority medical devices, which you might be familiar with. And these devices are also not only for universal health coverage, but also to respond to outbreaks and emergencies like we did for the COVID. And the idea is that we can search from all the steps from the industry, the health technology assessment, the regulatory process, and also procurement affordability, but they all need a common nomenclature. So medical devices, as you can see from COVID response, they were absolutely indispensable to COVID response and preparedness and response. And we see the same thing for any other pandemic to happen. We had to define what are the technologies that were needed for every type of intervention. And then we defined the priority medical devices list for COVID in an incredibly short time in November 2020. and they were defined which ones are needed for diagnostic, for treatment, or rehabilitation. On the diagnostics, we have both the diagnostics that are in vitro, but also diagnostics that are like blood pressure measurement, oximeters, and imaging. And this is a major issue because there is no definitions of diagnostics. There are definitions of IBDs, but not of diagnostics. So WHO is now working on this, and there is a proposal for a resolution to be discussed in WHO in the World Health Assembly on diagnostics, access to diagnostics. WHO is placing all the information in electronic platforms so that everybody everywhere can have access to it, and so that member states can have, with their national committees, being able to discuss which are the priorities and then assign it to their facilities. The three challenges that we have that are immense are the naming of medical devices, that is the nomenclature, the access affordability to innovation, and the role of biomedical engineers in decision making, because many times the biomedical engineers are not included. So we have to sit in the table, and we very much appreciate this parliamentarian meeting where you have biomedical engineers in the table. WHO is looking for innovative technologies, as you can see here. The WHO is also looking for technology access pool to share information, share knowledge, and share IP. And we have to insist on the role of biomedical engineers. And they're using a common nomenclature that we can have all the lists available for all countries that are needed. So our way forward is that medical devices are required in all health systems, specifically for emergencies, but also for universal health coverage, that they need to be quality, available, affordable, accessible, and safe. Innovation is constantly required. In nomenclature is an essential element. And please, we all need to remember that the final goal is not the technology per se, but the effective and promptly diagnostics to allow patients a good treatment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being with us, Dr. Velasquez. So we have only like 4 minutes for this session, and therefore I will just announce Dr. Moon, who is the WHO Health Emergencies Program leader. Then we will have to quickly leave the room here. So I kindly ask you to prepare your questions for a discussion in the corridor. And I will also ask Dr. Pecchia and Dr. Khalidou to organize at the European Alliance webpage a platform for putting the questions and for making it possible for the speakers to answer. So thank you very much for being here. Not yet goodbye. Dr. Moon, just a few minutes, please.
Certainly. All right, let's rapid fire this. Pleasure to be here. Infection prevention and control. Goal during emergency response is to initiate or maintain prevention systems as they're described here, and reduce the risk of the health facility itself as a place which congregates people who are sick, either initiating or amplifying outbreak transmission. As you can see, just back 1 second. Bottom of the slide here, IPC is not doing well in general. Next. This is chain of transmission. Goal is to identify which link we can break. All the links need to happen for an infection to occur. Next. This is Ebola. IPC has a very important clinical leadership role to prevent staph infections and to prevent Ebola from transmitting by using a lot of advanced techniques and congregating people together. But this is temporary infrastructure. It's not usually maintained after the outbreak, and it tends to be a drop-in response that doesn't necessarily help the health system in the long term. Next slide. This is water sanitation hygiene, which is the most important base level intervention in health facilities to prevent infection. When water sanitation hygiene can't be assured, there's very limited things that we can do because there's too many reservoirs of infection. Next slide. These are pictures of an investigation which took place in a hospital that was affected by a nearby conflict and experiencing a surge of patients and a high rate of pediatric and neonatal sepsis. This is important for 2 reasons. One is that there were many preventative controls in this hospital, and 2, the reservoirs and secondary concerns could be anywhere. What we found here could have just as easily happened in Brussels, could have just as easily happened in Geneva. Next slide, please. We found biofilms on the pediatric nutrition preparation tables and the handles used for pouring of formula, which persisted after cleaning and disinfection. We found the cardboard boxes that were used to store sterile supplies were heavily contaminated. This is tough. These contamination reservoirs, in both of these instances, you could do perfect practice and still result in an infection. The only way to determine that this is a risk is to do these types of investigations. Next slide, please. These are clinical areas which are well worth investing in for their impact during public health emergencies, but IPC is not always a key consideration for them. Next slide. This is just where all of these systems can also be used for infection prevention and control, not always considered during their development. Next slide, please. So infection prevention and control systems, whether effective or not, can help answer questions about pathogen transmission in a way that no other field really can. At the level of investigative detail you can get from a detailed patient record, tracking their locations and exposures within the health facility, combined with the level of controls possible in healthcare settings, there's nothing else that can really provide that level of information. This is some IPC research that the WHO team conducted over the course of COVID-19 on personal protective equipment with a generous grant from the German Federal Ministry of Health. Next slide, please.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry. We'll have to cut your speech now. Thank you very much. And my apologies. Again, thanks to our host for providing the space and the time, and thank you for being with us all this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to present. The presentation today will be about monitoring and mitigating shortages of critical medical devices in the context of a public health emergency. So the next slide gives actually an overview about the different monitoring and about the task of monitoring and mitigating shortages of critical medical devices. So the implementation date of this was on the 2nd of February 2023. So this concerns actually the chapter which focuses on the critical medical devices. So very importantly, within the provision of Regulation EU 2022/123, EMA has a central role in monitoring and mitigating shortages of critical medical devices only in the context of a public health emergency. One of the key structures that will be set up is the Executive Group on Shortages of Medical Devices. That's the MDSSG. It will be set up as part of the agency and is responsible for adopting a list of categories of critical medical devices, the so-called critical medical devices list. So this list will be updated whenever necessary until the termination of the individual public health emergency. So the MDSSG is also responsible for defining the set of information to be provided to monitor the supply of and demand for medical devices that are included in this public health emergency critical medical devices list, with a view to identify any actual or potential shortage of those medical devices. The MDSSG is also responsible for reporting and providing recommendations and coordinating activities on measures to prevent or mitigate potential actual shortages and provide aggregated data and forecast of demand. The next slide gives you an overview about the Executive Steering Group on Shortages of Medical Devices, as it's seen on the screen. So it's composed of members or representatives of the European Commission, of the member states, and of EMA. Also PCWP, so Patients and Consumers Working Party, and Healthcare Professionals Working Party, HCPWP, may be invited as observers. So there are close interactions with other institutions like the HERA, the Health Security Committee, ECDC, and the MDCG. So further, there will be experts in scientific, specific scientific or technical fields may be invited to the meetings of the MDSSG, as well as invited observers to provide expert advice. So the two boxes in the center actually refers to the so-called EO SPOC. So that's the economic operator single point of contact, and the notified bodies NB single point of contacts, as well as the supporting working party of the MDSSG, which is called the Medical Devices Single Point of Contact SPOC Working Party. So the next slide provides an overview about these two boxes. And this is actually the single point of contact in the member states and relevant economic operators for the critical medical devices that are included in the list of critical medical devices. So economic operators box and notified bodies box are manufacturers and authorized representatives, and where appropriate, distributors and importers. Also, information will be collected from notified bodies. The Medical Devices Shortages SPOC Working Party is an operational group, and it consists of representatives of the national competent authorities. The next slide will just give an overview about actually one of the critical elements to gather data, to gather information as kind of being further detailed in the regulation, EU 2022-123. So for gathering the data and for enable actually NCAs, economic operators and notified bodies, so on the left side, to report actually information on the relevant critical medical devices. The agency is currently developing a reporting system, which of course can be regularly updated, and also a data analysis system. So this is called the so-called CMDS. So that's the Critical Medical Devices System. It encompasses, includes modules for the user registration and the login. It also it contains the platform, and we are developing this system together with DG Santé from the European Commission. It's so the platform is called for collecting the data, the Santé data collection platform, and then it includes also elements for data warehousing and analytics. So the next slide gives just a short overview about the current status and the next steps. So the first administrative meeting of the MDSSG was held very recently on 15th of March. An ad hoc drafting group was established in October 2022 to support the implementation of key elements of the regulation 2022-123. So the MDSSG supporting working party, the so-called SPOC working party, as an operational group will continue the activities currently undertaken by by the ad hoc drafting group and will support the MDSSG as foreseen in the legislation. As mentioned briefly on the previous slide, the development of the IT system CMDS, Critical Medical Device Shortages, is ongoing and will be finalized by July 2023. And EMA will continue the interactions with industry associations, notified bodies, other EU institutions, and other relevant stakeholders. With this, I would like to finalize my slides, and thank you very much for your interest.